So in this first one, I think we're going to have quite a heavy science-based sort of thing today. So I've tried to keep this kind of low key, just have a bit of some of my thoughts really on why some of the breeds are rare, who they are, and why they're rare. I do have well, we're not on the vulnerable native breed list anymore, but we're on the at watch list. So I've got Welsh Terriers myself. So I do very much feel with people in the room how challenging sometimes it can be to breed some of these breeds, you know, as ethically as you can, as healthy as you can, with, you know, some breed type about them that will fulfill their original function, but then will still be suitable for, you know, family homes. It is a really, really difficult task. There's no two ways about it. So I'm just going to talk briefly about who the rare breeds are. The importance of saving these breeds, which hopefully, as I can see, a lot of people in the room I recognise, and I know you've got rare breeds yourself. So hopefully I won't need to really dwell too much on that point, because people will think it is important to save these. And talk about why they're rare. I've just sort of picked out a few things. So the vulnerable native breed list is quite an easy list to access to find a list of breeds which have got low registration numbers, and then there's also the native at watch list, which didn't used to exist. It used to be just the vulnerable breeds list, but they sort of split it into two over time. And I suppose many of the imported breeds are kind of rare breeds in the UK, so to speak. So that's one of my Welsh Terriers there, just on the bottom left. So that's Maisie. How old do you reckon she was there? She's got to be in double figures when we went to Ireland then. That was, so yeah. So Maisie lived till she was 16 and a half. She was a great fun dog. She was really my heart dog. And then we've got Kevin just on the right. So that's my Grand Basset Griffon Rondine. So a French breed. So there aren't many of those in the UK. And then we've got a Field Spaniel just there at the top that one of our clients kindly let us use. As most people in the room will probably know, the KC Vulnerable Native Breeds list is made up of breeds that have fewer than 300 KC registrations per year, and native to Britain or Ireland's also included on that list. And these breeds are considered at risk due to decline in registrations, although some aren't. This sort of come from the Kennel Club website. Some aren't declining, some are increasing in numbers. There's quite a variety of breeds and sort of what's happening with them. And at present, there are 34 breeds on this list, which I think quite a lot of breeds. And then the at watch list, which I'm not sure exactly what year that came about. It's not been going as long. Breeds have registrations between 300 to 450 per year. And these breeds are not sort of considered such high risk, but they are monitored by the Kennel Club and by breed clubs, I suppose. And at the moment, there are 8 breeds on that list. So I just sort of put this in. I'm not sort of expecting anybody to kind of read it in any great depth, but this is just sort of the rolling 10-year figures for vulnerable native breeds. You can see quite a few on the list. I think what sort of strikes me when you just look at that is kind of the number of breeds which historically had sort of quite strong kind of working hunting functions. And, you know, long gone are the days when actually we use these dogs to actually hunt for food. I know, you know, dogs still are worked in those disciplines, but, you know, you don't go and get a terrier now to feed you and put a rabbit on your table, you know, on a regular basis, although some very much will. But Welsh Terriers are quite good at that function, whether you want them to or not. And then this is just the at watch list, which is a bit shorter, and then you can see at the bottom, care terriers have been removed, but if you sort of look at the figures for care, and they sort of only had kind of a temporary drop anyway. So whether or not they really needed to be on there is, I'm not sure, but it was, I suppose, a sort of fairly sudden decline. So I've just picked out just a couple of breeds off there and just sort of picked 2 time points. The time point 2021 obviously is going to be affected by COVID, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to mention that. So you can see the bloodhound there on the left. In 2017, they already had quite small numbers registered. In 2021, you know, you're almost approaching single figures. I think that's really a worry for this breed. And you do start to get to the point you think, how can we make this breed survive? It's literally on the brink of existing. And I think bloodhounds are the most wonderful breed. If I was going to have another breed, I could quite happily have I could have a pack of bloodhounds quite easily. Find them might be more of a challenge. Then we've got the Irish red and white setters there, and you can see not quite as dramatic drop as sort of the bloodhound, but still very much in worrying figures there, really quite low. And important to say in these breeds, I think there are some of the best dog breeds in the world listed on this list. I don't think there's two ways about it, and some of them got such a rich breed history. We're talking Welsh Terriers from sort of my own personal perspective. They are thought to be the oldest still existing terrier breed in the UK. And you know, they are in trouble because the numbers are dwindling. And many of these breeds will still fulfill their original functions. A lot of them, the working traits have been kept, but I think it's also important to think a lot of them are quite adaptable to new functions. So with my old Welsh Terrier that was running around before, I actually did a little bit of agility with her, and she was actually really good at it. And most people wouldn't necessarily think for agility, the first breed, you know, being a Welsh Terrier, you know, you're not probably going to, well, you're not going to compete with the collies with a Welsh Terrier, but they can still be good at it because they have great fun doing it. I think with some of these breeds, once they're lost, they may be lost forever. And so here's just an example of a few breeds which have already gone beyond that point. I mean, so I sort of know a bit more about sort of the old English Black and Tan Terrier. So it is sort of thought that is still behind kind of the Manchesters of today, the Welsh Terriers of today. It's thought to be one of the founder breeds, but the breed as it was there no longer exists. So really, we want to save some of the breeds that we know are vulnerable now from this fate. And I think it's important to think, why are these breeds rare? I kind of feel like when I was attached to this presentation, this is kind of the impossible presentation to give, because I think every breed has its own unique challenges that you can't do one size fits all. So all I'm really trying to do is go through and kind of put some thoughts really out there for why some of these breeds might be in the position they are. And I think there are certainly some breed factors. There are some breeder factors. I think there are a number of legislation, ethic and guideline factors. I think there are some veterinary factors, and I think there are some genetic factors. You know, this could be much longer. I'm just sort of trying to put together just a few ideas here. So in terms of breed factors, I think popularity is sort of quite a big one, and sort of how well known it is that these breeds are even out there in the first place. And I think the media and social media has a big part, particularly if you look at this question the other way. You know, you'll sort of see celebrities with their toy and handbag breeds, and then, you know, suddenly you might see a sudden rise in people wanting to keep those types of breeds. I think some breeds that I'm not saying they've lost their ability to fulfill their function, but a lot of them, their function doesn't exist anymore. So again, Welsh Terriers I'm familiar with, you know, they were bred for badger hunting. You know, badger hunting, it is illegal, so that function no longer exists. So for people that would want them for a purely working function, don't need them for that anymore because the job's no longer there. And I think there's a big challenge, I think, a lot of time with public expectations. And I think, you know, I've just put in exercise, grooming, training, handling requirements. I think what people actually want may not be the same as what it perhaps used to be. For many of the trim breeds, particularly in the terrier group, we're seeing that people actually don't want to do that level of grooming anymore because it is hard work. Training them can be quite hard work. And I think people are sometimes going for what they perceive to be easier options that fit in more with their lifestyle. And I think there is also a challenge with people with patience. I mean, Rachel will tell you, we have this time and time again, like people think you can just, you know, go and get you know, these breeds from the supermarket, like a tin of beans, and, you know, oh yeah, I want one next month, can you make it? So I've got one next month, and it doesn't work like that. So I think sometimes there is an issue with, you know, people just not being patient, but then the flip side of that, if they're not that patient, they really want that breed. Something we see particularly in Welsh Terriers, a challenge for us, is that we do typically have quite small litter sizes. So that's kind of a challenge in itself. And all these kind of things all linked together, and hopefully I'll try and put some of the links together with kind of the other factors. So in terms of breeder factors, I know in the breeds I'm involved with, we've lost a lot of our really well-established breeders, and they've just not really been replaced. And it's really important for us within our breeds to, when we do have new people enthusiastic, to really culture those people, because we do need people to breed these breeds to take them into the future. And I think there is sometimes a bit of a tricky one really to get the point across without sounding like I'm kind of bashing people, but sometimes I think there is a bit of an approachability issue, and I probably am, as a breeder, I probably do sometimes have issues there because you know, you want to make sure puppies go to the most responsible places, and sometimes you might actually make judgments before you really had those detailed conversations with people. And you know, there are some breeds that, whether it's actually a real thing, they are talked about as particularly difficult breeds to actually get your hands on. If you want one of those breeds, people won't let you have one if you want to breed it. And kind of to sustain these breeds, we need people to breed. Obviously, we need the right people to breed, because you don't want people just sort of, you know, churning them out in an unethical manner, because that's not the aim. You don't want to save a breed through really unethical means. But I do think sometimes with these breeds, we do just need to take a step back and go, sometimes are we alienating people before we've actually really established if they are kind of the right people for our breed? And something I think we're hearing again is lack of suitable stud dog options. I don't think I've used another stud dog for about 10 years for somebody else's in the UK. Every stud dog I've used has been from overseas, and that kind of comes with its own challenges in Welsh Terriers. And that's largely just down to a lot of the dogs haven't kind of got my requirements for, I think, health testing. We were quite far behind in Welsh Terriers compared to other countries, so we have a problem. Some people of the terrier breeds might have come across at primary lens luxation. So we were the first kennel to test for that, and a lot of people were adamant they didn't want to test for it because it doesn't exist in our breed. So for us, that was kind of a bit of a challenge, because, you know, we want to do better. We don't want to do it. There's no problem. Let's just bury our heads in the sand. We've not seen it, so it's not there. We went and looked for it, and so then that kind of straight away limited our breeding choices before other people got on board with actually wanting to do the testing. Because how can you have a disease and know it's there and know it causes problems, and not use the tools out there to identify these problems? And it's a pretty bad condition when they get primary luxation, and it can sort of develop to glaucoma, and it can be pretty. I used to do quite a bit of pet trimming, and I used to trim a bit, which she actually had this, and she was really quite a sad case. If you remember, she was quite sorry. She had a lot of pain, didn't she? And actually, that bitch, when she had both of her eyes removed, was the happiest we ever knew her. And her behaviour was really quite unruly, and actually, a lot of it was probably the pain and discomfort from this. And the owners tried to save her eyes. And actually, in the long run, they said they wish they'd just had them taken out straight away. But wouldn't it be even better not even to produce those animals in the first place when we've got the tools to prevent that? And then I just sort of put a few, I mean, this is to go on and on and on for legislation, ethics and guidelines. I think there is a particular challenge, particularly when you pair it with some of these breeds produce small litters, that hobby breeders can only have up to 2 litters. And I know there are whole other things that, you know, there's the £1,000 threshold for selling puppies and things like that that can mean whether you need a license or you don't. But I think it has caused challenges. And there are a number of breeders in our breed have actually walked away from breeding because of kind of the new legislation. And I think most people in the room would probably agree, if you want to make money out of breeding dogs, the rare breeds are not really the way to go. You know, to do this well, you have to invest a lot of time, effort, money, blood, sweat and tears to breed these breeds well. And another challenge is there's quite a variation in dog breeding license, the variation in how individual councils are interpreting that. Actually, if everybody that fulfilled the criteria that needed a dog breeding license did actually apply for one, there wouldn't even be the resources out there actually to be able to process all the applications. And I think sometimes some kennel club regulations sort of on putting breeding restrictions on and export restrictions can come with its own challenge. I go through fits and fads where I put breeding restrictions on my puppies, and then sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I don't really know what the right answer is. But the reason I like to do them is because if somebody's making a breeding decision with you know, something that I've bred, it kind of makes them come back to me, and I can kind of, without saying don't go to that breed or don't go to them or don't go to them, I can kind of help guide them down a path that I think is going to help them produce, you know, dogs of good health, good temperament, nice type. Because, you know, we all do sort of have a bit of an awareness in our breed of where we think certain problems might be coming from. So I like to have it for that. But then on the other hand, I think it does just put some people off breeding altogether because you put a restriction on them. If I had something which I thought got a, you know, particularly problematic congenital problem or something, and I thought it was going to be an issue for it lifelong and it may pass it on, then I'd put a breeding restriction on and I'd try and say I will not remove it. Fortunately, I've not had that happen very often. And I think export restrictions also comes with kind of its own problems, because that can stop kind of sharing of the genetics, which for the vulnerable native breeds, we really, I think, do need to be thinking on an international level to keep these breeds sustainable. And I think there are sort of some veterinary factors. So I think in the UK, what I hear time and time again from breeders is they do feel there are a lack of veterinary reproductive services out there. You know, there are, I think it is slowly growing. I think there has also been a big push kind of for the lay clinics, because the veterinary field, the breeders haven't fulfilled it. And that's obviously caused its own kind of problems. I think there's definitely a pro-spay neuter culture in a lot of practices in the UK, and this, with my Welsh Terriers, this eats me up inside a little bit, because I've had dogs where people have, you know, wanted to keep them entire, and yeah, they've said, you know, if you want them to be used at stud, they're kind of up for that. And then, you know, you speak to them a few months down the line, and they've had them castrated, and some of them even feel like they've been bullied into having them castrated. I think I'm not saying that we shouldn't be spraying and neutering dogs, I think we should, but I do just think we've got an extra layer of complexity with some of these rare breeds. I mean, if they're not suitable for breeding, yeah, no problem with it. If there are particular health concerns, yeah, no problem with it. But I think kind of having it as a routine option gives us kind of an even greater challenge. We've already got a limited number of dogs out there to start with. We've greatly reduced kind of the breeding population, and some of them may be really good, really healthy examples. And we've completely removed the ability for them to reproduce. And it's fun. So health testing requirement pressures like ums and ahs and ums and ahs and ums and ahs, back whether to put this in or not, because obviously we want to be testing our dogs to check that we're breeding from healthy animals. But I think sometimes some people I just want to test for everything. And every kind of health test equal, I want a completely, you know, disease-free animal with absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. I think in some instances that's not perhaps the way to go. And when I get to genetic bottleneck, and I'm just going to talk through sort of a hypothetical situation, sort of wire fox terriers, which hopefully get what I'm trying to say through there. And there are sort of a host of genetic factors. I'm not going to focus too much on this here, because I know other speakers are going to give you a lot more genetics. But we are sort of by definition with breeding in the way we do with kennel club breeds. We are breeding within a closed gene pool. You know, we pick breeds of a specific breed, and you know, we don't very often breed outside of that. So it is sort of a closed pool. We hear all the time high coefficients of inbreeding are kind of not ideal. They do increase susceptibility to diseases, particularly recessive diseases. Some of the breeds start from really small foundations, so even breeds that aren't actually on the vulnerable native breeds are still susceptible because they come from such small populations. I think the Nova Scotia duck-collar retriever is probably quite a good example of that, where the founder population was really, really small, even though now as a breed, there numerically quite a lot of them around compared to what there once were. Then we've got kind of a few concepts. We've got genetic bottlenecking and the extinction vortex. And this is just sort of a bit about population size, just sort of drop this in. So sort of the green are kind of what we're hoping for. So we want high genetic diversity. We want them to have less vulnerability to disease because they've got this diversity. We want to reduce the risk of inherited diseases. We don't want to risk the extinction vortex, and we have a high population that's sustainable. Obviously, a lot of these breeds at the bottom, they are not all breeds. We realise that. Just some cute pictures. But then we sort of got the more problematic side. We've got low genetic diversity, which we see does come with an increased vulnerability to diseases, particularly inherited diseases, and then you are at risk of going into the extinction vortex, and you know, the breeds may become unsustainable altogether. So this is just a diagram of the extinction vortex. I think Lucy will be speaking. Andy will be speaking more about this then. So I'm not going to kind of dwell on it too much, but it's sort of parallel to what we see in kind of the natural world. I suppose we're sort of creating in the dog breeding world. So you'll start off with a stable population, and then the population may decline. In the natural world, that's often due to human behaviour and loss of habitats for species, and then your population starts to decline, your genetic diversity declines, and then as Tullis has mentioned, you get into this vortex, which is really challenging to get back out of. But hopefully other speakers will give a bit of an idea of where we can go with this. Something in particular I think we sort of see in dogs is when we get higher coefficients of inbreeding. I think some breeds we do see kind of poor fertility in general in them, or we're getting small litter sizes, or they're difficult to get pregnant in the first place. So even though it's not quite the same as the natural world, we are still seeing some sort of parallels with that. And then genetic bottlenecking. So sort of tried to think in my head of a hypothetical situation to link into kind of my concerns with health testing. So in white fox terriers, we're not a vulnerable breed, although I think we probably do tick many of the boxes of being a vulnerable breed, even though the are better than the ones on the list in terms of registered puppies. So one disease, so a lot of people may have come across the at-risk test for degenerative myelopathy. So sort of a lot of breeds were included in the study. Well, wire fox terriers kind of fared worse for carrying the at-risk gene for degenerative myelopathy. So right at the top of the list are the highest incidence of the at-risk gene. And it's important to note this is an at-risk gene. It doesn't mean the dogs will go on to get the disease. It's just if they have this particular genetic sequence, they're more at risk of having degenerative myelopathy. Another kind of thing with degenerative myelopathy, it's typically a late onset disease, so often dogs 12, 13 years old, as opposed to another problem we have in the breed called VDEGS, which is Van den Ende Gupta syndrome, where puppies are born completely skeletally deformed. To me, that's a much greater issue. However, the Kennel Club are more focused on DM than they are on VDEGS. So to give you some idea of numbers, quite a large number of wire fox tests, I think it was over 80 were included in the original study, and of them, over 90% had 2 copies of the at-risk gene for degenerative myelopathy. It was something like 5–6% came back as being carriers of it. It was about 2–3% which were actually clear of 2 copies of it. So if we started breeding from just the ones that were clear or carriers to try to breed away from this problem, which there are some people out there, that's the way they want to go with this, the genetic bottleneck we would talk that would be phenomenal, because we would be breeding from less than 10% of our current population, and I just think that would be disastrous. So as the breed health rep, my current stance, which may change, and some people may say is irresponsible, I have to tell people, don't do this test. Because if you do this test and then we remove all of the ones in this at-risk sequence, our breed is not going to exist as we know it. We are literally going to decimate the breed over one test, which isn't the most reliable test we have to actually determine which dogs will actually get the disease, as opposed to the VDEGS test, which is a very good, very reliable test. And I have sort of been having challenges with kind of the Kennel Club of getting the priorities changed a little bit for this breed. Still ongoing. They do listen, but progress is slow, and they want evidence for everything, which is understandable, but sometimes you kind of need the test before you can get the evidence. So that was just sort of my kind of example of sort of how we could potentially cause a genetic bottleneck, because what I didn't want to do with this was kind of target individual breeds, to be this breed, this has happened, and this has caused a problem, and now they're not sustainable, because that's completely against sort of the ethos of the day. We want to save these breeds, but I just thought I'd give a hypothetical example so as not to hopefully offend anyone. And just sort of to summarise from there, I think there are some wonderful rare breeds. Hopefully most people in the room, as you are all very involved in the rare breeds, would agree. Our small populations in these breeds do leave us particularly vulnerable. You know, the lack of genetic diversity does cause some problems, as you've mentioned, with, you know, disease risk. And without change, I think some of these breeds are really at risk of not continuing, certainly in my lifetime. And I think that's all for that one. So hopefully it's a bit of a light-hearted introduction and not fried anyone's brains too much yet.